Okay, welcome to our show tonight, our meeting tonight, the February meeting. Thank you tonight to our interpreters. They are Weston Roach and India Hitchcock. We always appreciate you being here. Please mute your mic if you have not done so already, because I'm getting some feedback. Marshall, it might be yours. Is your audio on?
We basically needed protection because if he didn't do that, he might be
I have somebody else's audio, so turn your audio off, please.
I will keep you posted. Everybody else.
Okay, I'm gonna kill it if I have to for some of you. Good, I don't have to kill it, except for Betsy, you're fine. You're gonna be the speaker. All right, so I know we have some new members or visitors tonight. So I want you to tell us a little about yourself. How did you hear about the club? And what types of photography do you like to shoot? Let's start with Ed.
Okay, well, my name is Ed Bunyan. I have been a professional photographer since November of 1981 when I started working on the newspaper. I was a photojournalist for over 35 years. Finally left when Tribune gave me an offer I couldn't refuse because I was too expensive and too old. They needed young people coming in who could work dirt cheap, and so I got a good buyout. I mean, I'll go for there, but I'm too young to retire. I just can't sit around. So I now have Ed Bunyan Photography, which is a basic commercial business, focusing mostly on real estate listings. So if there's any realtors out there who need a photographer, please feel free to contact me. And other than that, I love doing nature photography, plants and such, and just enjoying life right here. I heard about the club years ago. I went to one meeting at the Delplane Center. And because I was with another group, a social group doing help stuff for people, I couldn't come. But now that's not happening because of COVID. And I just checked online for camera groups, and this group popped up. I'm glad to be here tonight. Thank you for letting me come forward.
Well, great. Thanks to have you. Where do you live, Ed?
Right in Frederick. I'm actually one street out of Frederick, right on the side of the mountains.
Oh, good.
Yeah, right on Rocky Springs Road.
Okay, well, good. Well, we welcome you to join us if you're interested in that and having membership. Membership's only $30, but you get a lot of benefits from that. So
that's a lot cheaper than a lot of my other groups. So yeah, definitely. I'll check in online. I'll see about how I pay for that. So
great. Okay, perfect. Let's see who else we have that might be new or a visitor. Rose.
Yeah, 1 second.
Hi.
I put my video on a little bit. 1 second. My name is Rose. Sad. I think I'm like an amateur photographer. I want to be a photographer, and I think I'm not even. I don't know. I love photography, especially landscape and nature. And I'm still struggling with my basics. You know, like basic camera settings. I'm still struggling with camera settings a lot, and I tend to just go to my iPhone. My iPhone is better pictures now. So somebody recommended that I join a club. Maybe I can follow people around and learn more. And that's what I want to do, to learn more, to be a photographer versus an iPhone photographer. So so I am like, I'm just trying to find a group that I can learn from, basically, because I really want to take my photography higher when I retire. I want to travel around around the world and take pictures. So I think it's time for me to learn the professional way. So I thought maybe being part of a club may be the first.
Yes, you have chosen the right group. We have people here who are iPhone photographers, people who are, I mean, Ed sounds like he's the only one who makes money from photography here. So the rest of us are all hobbyists. Some are beginners. We, in the email blast, we have classes offered that a lot of people take classes at Frederick Community College or through capital photography classes. And we also have opportunities to get together and go on photo walks together. I'll be telling you about one of those tonight. So yes, and we have a Facebook page too, a private Facebook page for members where a lot of people trade information about camera settings and editing tips and things like that. So I think you would enjoy coming here as a member and immersing yourself in photography. So
right.
we're here to help you learn.
Thank
Good.
you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Who is Chris?
Oh, hi.
Are you our newest member that just
I
joined like
am.
today or last night?
I did.
Oh,
I
great.
did.
Welcome
I just
aboard.
joined. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I was happy. I'm just a hobbyist, but I was happy to find the club. So I'm looking forward to it.
How did you hear about us?
Oh, and I don't even know if my video is not on. Here, I'm going to turn it on. I think I found the club through looking at the Delaplane Arts newsletter, I think. Either that or just trolling online, looking for camera stuff.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So yeah, one of those. And then I've been meaning to join for a couple of months and then finally did. So
Wonderful. I saw your membership come in at like 10 o'clock last night, but I thought, no,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna email back tonight.
Oh, that would have been fine.
Well,
But yeah, it was nice to get a couple of emails today. So yeah, so that was great.
glad you're here.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
wonderful. Do we have anybody else who is either a new member or a visitor tonight? I'm looking up and down the list. I don't see any more unfamiliar names. Okay, I'm going to assume that we can move on. All right. So each month we have a photo challenge. I don't know if I kind of blew the topic this month. It doesn't seem to generate much interest, but we will have a photo club challenge where you will have to make, create, or learn something in order to challenge yourself and grow. And this month's topic is a different type of selfie. So you're challenged to make a full body selfie with no help from anyone else. I think Betsy's going to show us some of her selfies where she used her remote or a timer to take a photo of herself. So am I right, Betsy?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So I did post one the other day. I used my cell phone to take it with a timer, and I had to prop it up on a porch of a house and then run and get in the shot. So that's your challenge, is to make a selfie that you are in, a whole you is in there and no one else took it. And when I mean whole you, it's not, you arm's length away from a camera or the phone. The member showcase of images. Each month we have a showcase of member images. They are due Friday, February 25th to Paul, who will put them together into the monthly show, and details for how to prep your images and the email address to send them to are in the email blast. All members get the email blast on a regular basis. I put it out about twice a month, sometimes more often. There are only 2 days left to enter the 8th annual Allegheny National Photography Competition and exhibition in Cumberland. And the details are in the email blast and on the Arts Council website. The top prize for that one is $1,500. So it's a nice competition. Hard to get into because they get like, 1,000 entries. So it's a good one though. Walkabout Wednesdays. So this is for some of you. The weather's getting nicer now, at least the next couple of days. And Janine Oberton introduced me to this group. And I know they went out today and walked Carroll Creek, but they meet the second and fourth Wednesday of each month to do a photo walk. So if you're on Facebook, check the Walkabout Wednesdays group, or I'm putting Janine on the spot here. I know she's here. Contact her for more information to join up with this group and, hook up with other people and learn about new locations, and people can actually help you with some of your camera settings if you need some assistance. The Cumberland Valley shows. There are 2 shows that are opening on Saturday, February 19th at the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts in Hagerstown. One is the Cumberland Valley Photography, and the other is the Artists Show. They're both big shows. We have a number of members who had work accepted into these shows, and Stephanie Boss won the Washington County Arts Council Award of $250 for her photo in the shadows. So congratulations to all who were accepted and to Stephanie for her win. Here is Stephanie's shot. So study this shot and look underneath the statue on the left, down in the shadows.
Very cool.
That was her subject. And that won a prize, $250. The Artist Gallery, TAG. Stop in TAG this month. It's on the corner of North Market and 5th Streets to see work by Tom Doors in the Associates show at the TAG Gallery. So Carol said he's down in Cambridge tonight. So he's not on Zoom tonight, but his show is up at TAG. It's a nice gallery to visit. Are there any other announcements from anyone else? I guess not. Okay, tonight's speaker. I have speakers, plural. My mistake. We only have one. It is Betsy Wilson, who will share with us her amazing ways of capturing motion in her images. We're in for a treat. I saw this presentation when it was given to the Central Maryland Photographers Guild, and I thought we need to get her for our group. So she sent a little bio. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but she began her photography after retiring from her career as a newspaper publisher. So you and Ed Bunyan have something in common. Her husband gave her his hand-me-down camera and a lot of encouragement, and she has never looked back. So she has a wide variety of interests, and she has won a number of awards, and she is a very active member of the Chester County Camera Club and has given numerous presentations and led workshops for area camera clubs. So we are pleased to have her here tonight. I'm going to stop the share.
Thank you.
And we should be able to see Betsy's share soon.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm going to stop my video.
Okay. Now I don't see the little box of me. This happened one other time. Can you, Cam, you're on mute now, but can you see me?
Yes, I can see you.
Okay, because sometimes I do move around a little bit. I don't know why I can't see myself, but I don't need to see me, so that's okay.
It
as long
might
as
be
you
up
can.
at the top in the upper corner, view side-by-side speaker.
More. Yeah, no, I don't see it.
Okay,
Well, I'm okay though. I mean, I'm
All right.
fine. So
Okay.
I don't
I
need to
will
see
mute
myself.
myself again.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. As Cam said, my husband Jim and I are very active in the Chester County Camera Club, and we have learned so much from the Camera Club. So some of you who are new here, you're in the right place. And I hope you all learned something new from me today. So Cam, let me know if the video or audio needs attention. And I will take a pause about halfway through to see if there are questions, but if there's anything that anyone needs to know about right away, just feel free to interrupt me. Oh. Okay, So motion, so many different interpretations. We can freeze a moment in time, capture a special moment, use techniques to manipulate motion, or see things in a different way, or use motion to create a mood or feeling. And here are some of the motion techniques that I'll cover. We're going to talk about freezing action, using long exposure, panning and zooming, rear curtain sync, and of course, photographing water. I'll touch on neutral density filters, and then we'll get into some fun things like light painting motion, a fun toy called a pixel stick, and I will wrap up with some fun tricks and Photoshop ideas that simulate motion. And I will include the shutter speed and aperture on most images. And by the way, Cam, I will share a PDF of the highlights of the presentation, so no one needs to take any notes. There are a few slides that have tips on them, but I'll get that on a PDF of the highlights of the presentation. And most of the images I will show are mine, but I have included some by my husband, Jim. He is the guilty party that got me into photography about 10 years ago. And he's my technical support, as I tend to focus more on the artistic side of things, and I can be somewhat technically challenged. And I find it's always a challenge creating a presentation for a diverse audience with all different levels of experience. And like most camera clubs, I know you have some members who are just starting out. We just heard from Rose and Janine that they both feel like they're fairly new to photography. And I've been to your website, so I know that you also have very many experienced and very talented photographers. So I'm going to start out with some basics and then gradually add some more advanced techniques. Because no matter how much you know about photography, one of the reasons I love it is there's always something new to learn and some new technique to try out. And while putting this together, I learned a few new things that I will share with you. So most of this presentation will include or involve in-camera techniques, but I will finish up with some post-processing ideas. My research started with a little bit of history. So you may be familiar with this very famous photograph by Henri Cartier-Bresson. It's often used to illustrate what is known as the decisive moment, when the visual and psychological elements in a scene briefly come together. So not only did he capture motion with the man's feet suspended above the water, but look at how the reflection in the water mirrors the image in this circus poster up here. Really amazing. And I love this image of a cyclist. It is believed that he found his composition and just waited for a cyclist to move into that exact desired position, another decisive moment. So these are both examples of freezing a moment in time. So let's move on to an image that shows motion, and we're going to settle a little wager. There was a businessman who named Leland Stanford, and he needed to settle a bet with some of his buddies because he contended that when his horse was racing, all four legs came off the ground simultaneously, which no one had seen, so no one believed it. Well, he paid photographer Edvard Muybridge to prove his point. So Muybridge set up a series of 12 cameras along the track that were triggered by the horse tripping wires. So he wound up with 12 images. And as you can see here, Mr. Stanford won his bet. In this top image, the third one in, all four legs were off the ground at the same time. So let's move to a single image that shows motion. Philadelphia artist Thomas Eakins, he was also a photographer. And ironically, he actually worked aside Muybridge for a while at the University of Pennsylvania. They must have had some interesting conversations. So Eakins developed his own method because he had the goal of studying anatomy to further his paintings. So whereas Muybridge's system relied on a series of cameras triggered to produce multiple photos, Eakins used a single camera to produce a series of exposures superimposed on one negative. And I want to mention one more from history. A 25-year-old Ansel Adams created this image of the monolith of Half Dome. He first used a yellow filter to darken the sky a bit, but his experience of what he saw was more dramatic than he knew he would get from that yellow filter. So after hiking up a mountain with heavy gear, he had only one glass plate left. he tried a new red filter, hoping it would darken the sky to create the image he imagined or visualized. And this experiment proved to be a turning point for Ansel Adams, because for the first time, he was conscious of the difference between what his camera lens saw and what he saw in his mind's eye as the final print. He discovered photographic visualization, a concept that I'll talk about again. So we'll be talking a lot about either freezing time or capturing a period of time, either using a fast shutter speed or a slow shutter speed. So most cameras have a mode dial with shutter priority marked on it. So you set your mode dial to either S for shutter. On some cameras, it's called TV for time value. And this activates shutter priority mode. This means you tell the camera how long you want the exposure to be. And in most cases, you're going to let the camera decide the rest. So let's start with the most basic of techniques of motion photography, a fast shutter speed. Fast exposures can freeze actions that happen faster than the blink of an eye. So this was shot at 1/2000th of a second. And people like to ask about other settings. So I will include the aperture and ISO on most images, but the most important factor here is shutter speed. A skateboarder in Central Park, frozen in midair at 1/500th of a second. Here's my husband, Jim. He's tossing cherry blossoms in the air. More skateboard antics, this one taken by Jim, and see, I did give him credit down there. And I like to imagine what thoughts must be going through the minds of the couple with their feet in the air. Fast shutter speeds are almost always used to capture sports events, to freeze the action. In addition to sports, there are many other fleeting moments that really the only way to capture is with a fast shutter speed. So I don't know if any of you have ever attempted to photograph frozen soap bubbles. I tried and failed numerous times before getting it, because if it isn't cold enough or if there is any wind, your bubbles will pop before you have a chance to push the shutter. And be prepared to freeze your fingers off to get this shot. This past week was a good opportunity to try this. And you have to be fast because they usually don't last long. I was actually happy to get this one right at the moment of exploding. But if you can capture these elusive bubbles, you may get some beautiful crystal formations like these. When photographing wildlife like this grizzly bear in British Columbia, I wanted to be sure to freeze any movement to get a sharp image. 1/500th of a second can freeze action. For faster action like birds in flight, you probably want to go with 1/1000th, maybe 1/2000th of a second. So these images are all taken with the camera set to shutter priority. And I want to point out the magic of a fast shutter speed. I am not a bird photographer, but I did have a goal of capturing a hummingbird, so at least I got these shots. But I included this to make a point about motion. Think about the speed of a hummingbird's wings. They flap, or actually they make a figure 8 movement, an average of 50 times a second, much faster than you can see with your eyes. So think about that bet on the feet of the racehorse. They had never actually seen all 4 feet in the air. Without high-speed photography, we would never see the wing of a hummingbird in flight. And a great place to practice capturing motion is at Middle Creek Wildlife Management Area. This is in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I'm sure some of you have been there, Cam. I know you just mentioned it. And this is the right time of year, late February, early March. Tens of thousands of beautiful snow geese stop here. And it's just an amazing sight and sound when they all lift up in unison. And close to sunset, they all fly in from the fields to roost on the lake for the night. And this is a good example of what your camera can see, but your eye cannot. Like a ceiling fan spinning around and you can't see the individual fan blades. These snow geese, they fly and they circle when you are there, and you experience this amazing motion, but your eye cannot freeze and see the scene like your camera can. These are tundra swans at Middle Creek, and they can be quite graceful when flying overhead. Another fast shutter speed to freeze the action of a street performer. So Jim and I were fortunate to go on a photography trip to Cuba, and we visited a local dance studio. Now, it was dim in the room, bright light pouring in from the back window. So you can see here, not the best lighting conditions. So in this case, I set my camera, a Sony a6000, to an automatic preset called Sport Mode, which means the camera would pick all the settings needed to freeze the action. So it shows a high ISO of 3200, which can create some noise or graininess. But for me, I would prefer to have some noise in the image and be able to capture unique dance actions rather than have a perfect quality shot and miss the whole point. We also attended a performance by a Santeria dance troupe. Santeria, it's an Afro-Cuban religion. The dancers perform a frenzied trance-like dance to drums that's just fascinating to watch. At 1/200th of a second, it was fast enough to freeze most of the action, but it's starting to introduce a bit of blur on the dress and in the hair. So these examples were all done with natural light, but the burst of a flash is much faster than the shutter speed of your camera. To really capture high-speed movement, it's best to use a flash. So although the shutter speed is 1/250th of a second, the motion is frozen by the flash, which is actually faster, as fast as maybe 1/10,000th of a second. So these were done at home just by dropping colorful objects into a fish tank. And you do need to pre-focus where you think your subject will be, as it happens way too fast for any kind of autofocus to work. So here's the setup. And again, I'll share a PDF of any slides like this one that include notes. So you need a fish tank with flat sides, and you need a dark background behind it. In this case, I have a black blanket hung up back there. After I took this shot, we actually painted the back side of our fish tank with black paint. Use a squeegee. The squeegee down here, that's to remove bubbles that form on the side of the glass. And you pre-focus on an object in the middle of the fish tank to simulate where you think your object will fall. So I put this piece of blue tape on this hammer because that's where I think that strawberry will be when I set the flash off. And then you set it to manual focus, obviously pull the hammer out, fill it up with water. Use an off-camera flash. Have a friend drop fruit or other objects into the fish tank, and pick a friend that doesn't mind getting wet, because you can make a lot of mess with this. And look around your house and see what you can experiment with. Find all sorts of fun things to try. Or get in the action yourself, and don't be afraid to get wet. And again, at 1/60th of a second, you would not freeze those bubbles unless you used a flash. And if you don't have a fish tank or an external flash, you can still create images like these. I just picked up a flat-sided clear plexiglass, a vase at the dollar store, and it works quite well for this. And I just set up a strong desk light for some side lighting and put some seltzer water in there for those little bubbles. Capturing the motion of smoke is fun. Burn some incense and use a flash. Long exposure. So images can be recorded in a fraction of a second or over much longer periods of time. So we've already seen fast, a fraction of a second. The movement is frozen, but now it's slowed down to 1/15th of a second, introducing some blur, allowing the camera to capture the movement of the birds. Even with wildlife, longer shutter speeds can lead to surprising new images. So experiment with different shutter speeds to make creative photographs. Fast shutter speed, slower shutter speed, and neither one is right or wrong. It just depends on what you're trying to convey. I love this capture by Jim. This is one of those snow geese at Middle Creek. And I took this one also at Middle Creek, a little surreal. Or slow that shutter down a bit to capture the motion of snow flying into an open window. If I had shot this at 1/500th of a second or faster, the snow would have been captured as tiny specks instead of these streaks, which gives more of a feel of motion. Time exposures can allow us to record things that we can't see with the naked eye. A long exposure turns headlights and taillights into streaks of light. And I love trying to capture a mix of static objects and moving objects, the people standing motionless while the train speeds by. And with a long shutter speed, people in motion can take on ghost-like qualities. Quite abstract, but you can still tell this is a SEPTA train speeding by. And this is a highway and the cars are probably doing at least 60 miles per hour. So this was a 2-second exposure to capture these streaks of light. But now I'm in a small downtown and the cars are moving much slower. So this was 8 seconds. Cameras on a tripod, which is a must when doing an 8-second exposure. And here's the same downtown from the roof of the public parking lot. Now the roof has this high cement wall around it, and I actually had to raise the tripod in the air and brace the tripod legs against a wall to get the camera high enough to get this shot. I had to guess at the direction of the camera. I think I got lucky. So, and it's always a fun challenge to capture wildlife. This is a school of menhaden fish in Cape Cod, and they were moving fast. I just love the spiral pattern they made. And this is a selfie of my shadow. Gives you an idea of a sense of scale and how many there were. And here, as I know some of you said, you're on your way to Bombay Hook. This was a muskrat taken at Bombay Hook. And not where you would expect to capture wildlife. This is actually at a sculpture garden in New Jersey, grounds for sculpture. An unlucky fish. Not sure what the bird is, some kind of a stork. This was from a wonderful trip we took to Botswana a couple of years ago. And a few more from that trip. This one just makes me laugh. And these elephants would dust themselves. First, they splash themselves with water, and then they create their own dust storm. Apparently the dust cools them off and it also protects their skin from parasites. But I love the motion of the dust swirling as it's lit up by the low sun. A capture of the elephant tossing the water up. A hippo thrashing about while sparring with another hippo. This was pretty intense. A baby baboon cradled by its mother. Setting up the scene and waiting for something to happen. Like Henri Cartier-Bresson's famous image. It is believed that he would scout out his composition and then just wait to capture that precisely timed, meaningful moment. What we see here is probably the result of the so-called fishing technique. You find a good location and then you just wait for a suitable subject to enter the frame and complete your composition. So here are a series of images by my husband, Jim. We were at a reenactment of the Revolutionary War, Battle of the Brandywine, and he was attracted to the repeating patterns of the soldiers' tents. And by moving around, he framed a nice composition of the leading lines going through 2 rows of tents. And every so often, some of the soldiers would walk through the frame. So we just stayed there for a while, hoping to capture someone of interest at just the right moment. And there it is. When this young soldier walked through with the drum on his back, he felt he had something special. And I agree. I had the same idea in Cuba as I was fascinated by the colors and shapes of the painted wall and the peeling paint on the door. So I just sat on the curb across the street and watched people going by. This guy in the pink cap, he wasn't going anywhere. But then I noticed that the low sun was creating some dramatic shadows on the wall. And I thought maybe I could get the man with the cap, perhaps showing an interaction with a shadow. And then it happened. Here's my finished shot. I think it's graphically pleasing, and I love the story and the expression on this man's face. Another example by Jim at Grand Central Station in New York. Bright sunlight was pouring in at a low angle, creating these long shadows. So he just positioned himself in the middle of the commotion and waited. He started out by framing the people, but then he tilted the camera down. He started to focus less on the people and more on the shadows, and just waiting for something interesting. And here it is. This was the decisive moment. The foot on the left and the foot on the right are both lifted off the floor, showing the movement. And the shadow of the little girl holding her father's hand, that captured the moment he was waiting for. So up until now, we have held the camera steady in either frozen motion or allowed motion to move and be captured. Let's shake that up a bit. Now we move the camera, intentional camera movement, or ICM, as it is sometimes referred to. It's a different branch of photography altogether. And the final result produces a blurred, colorful, abstract image on purpose. So, think of it as being like an expressionist painter. And panning is one of the most popular ICM techniques. It's easy and fun. So using a slower shutter speed, maybe 1/30th or 1/15th of a second, you're just swiping your camera up and down. You're panning your subject. So just swiping up and down on the side here. As the shutter's open, you swipe up or swipe down. Either way works. Sometimes these are called swipes. And part of the fun of panning is that you never really know how your image will turn out. And this is another example of how our eyes and the camera see things differently. If you look at a tree with your eyes and move your head up and down, you'll likely still see the tree well defined, but the camera doesn't. It sees a blur. And trees work quite well, as although you get this dreamy, surreal image, you still recognize the subject. It does take a lot of experimentation and be prepared to delete a lot of misses. This one has a bit of a shake in it, giving it a different sort of staccato or jumpy feel. And it doesn't have to be trees. This effect can work well with flowers. You probably recognize this is of tulips. And I like to just plop down on the ground and play with this technique. I just really like sort of the abstract movement effect. This one is not recognizable, but very abstract. It's a very colorful bunch of autumn leaves. And I like to experiment with other subjects and go beyond nature. There's an old steel factory near us called Steel Stacks, and I love photographing the structures and the colorful rust. Patterns, the textures are fantastic. But how about a motion blur here? Why not? Very abstract, but beautiful. At the Naval Shipyard in Philadelphia, just a small panning blur gives it a ghost-like effect. The ocean, now the panning is horizontal. Okay, a lot of times I'll just kind of brace my arms right onto my sides to try to stay as steady as possible and just sort of pivot. But now it's horizontal. On all of these examples, the camera is moving, but the subject is not. Let's go back to Cuba, a different kind of panning. Now, both the subject and the camera are moving. We follow our subject with the camera, and this allows us to get the subject relatively sharp and blur the background. So you try to match the subject's rate of movement and the direction in which it's traveling. And I did check your website and I saw a similar image on your year-end slideshow by Ray Conrad of a motorcycle. He nailed it by capturing the movement perfectly. He's got this technique down. So you swivel your camera along a parallel axis to your subject, and you hope to get at least a part of your subject in focus. So these colorful old cars were a distance away from me. I'm panning at about this speed. Swipe, swipe. Now it gets really crazy. At the Velodrome in Pennsylvania, these cyclists are very close to the camera, so the panning has to take place much faster. Now I'm going like this, swipe, swipe, swipe. And all you see in focus here is this guy's knee and then this explosion of motion in front and behind. It's much harder when they're going this fast. And you get some crazy stuff, quite surreal, but I love the effect created by the spinning of the spokes. So if you want to try this, put your camera on shutter priority. I'd say start with 1/30th of a second, but it can be faster, it can be slower. You have to adjust based on how fast your subject is moving and how far away your subject is from you. And you just keep practicing and practicing. And it does help if you just keep pointing it at your subject, even after your shutter's ended. It just helps you to keep your camera moving steady. And be prepared to take lots of frames, of which most will be throwaways. but I enjoy surprises of bizarre, ghostly images like this. Here are a few I took just a few months ago at a local cyclocross event. Cyclocross is so much fun to watch and photograph. And here I just love how the wheels just disappear into the track. Now this guy, he was coming down a hill, so I had to pan in a diagonal motion. That was kind of new for me. And I really like this one. I think a clear impression of speed and a colorful and strong composition. Zooming. Now let's add a new twist to intentional camera motion. And by new twist, I mean that literally. A normal picture of a colorful autumn tree, but if we twist our zoom lens, you can get some wonderful zoom motion. You zoom in or out while the shutter is open, okay? So while your shutter's open, you just zoom out or zoom in. Again, either way works. Hopefully you can see that there. Straight out of camera with no zoom. Now with a slight zoom. And this has quite an impressionistic look. Almost looks like dabs of paint. Lights in a store window. After taking a gazillion images of cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C., I wanted a different look. And I like the subtle, sort of dreamlike feel to this image. Cityscapes can be fun. Or just a little zoom on neon lights for a new look. Back to that cyclocross. These cyclists, they were weaving back and forth through the yellow taped path. I tried a zoom blur. And another one. I just like how you can see sort of the explosion effect on the grasses. Or try a rotation blur. Just spin your entire camera gently while the shutter is open. So you're not zooming a zoom lens, you're just rotating your camera like that. I do this a lot. I didn't even know I took this shot. Not sure if you would call this a zoom or panning or what. I was up on a ladder to get above the sunflowers and I must have pushed the shutter button on the way down, but I think it's kind of fun. And a perfect time to practice these motion techniques is with holiday lights. So here's the traditional Christmas tree shot. But watch what happens after I have a glass of wine. It's having a bit more fun. Oh, I like that. I think I'll have another. And with some more wine, it's really starting to party. Disco party. Okay, this one may have been after maybe a little bit too much wine. This is actually a combination of a zoom and rotating the camera at the same time. Again, a combination of panning, twisting, and a zoom blur. Basically a hangover. So these are actually holiday lights on an outdoor tree. I had read an article by Olympus about doing these rotational blurs and decided to try it out. I put the camera underneath a lit tree at Longwood Gardens and spun the camera. This is a crop of one of my experiments, very abstract, but I like how you can see the effect of the pulsating lights. Now this was pretty hard to set up and try to get the camera on a tripod, pointing straight up, down low, loosen the ball head so you can spin that camera around. And it was freezing cold out. And as usual, I wound up with some surprises. So I probably hit the shutter with my gloves on and didn't even know it of one of those lit trees at Longwood Gardens, but I like it. So we can't have a conversation about motion photography without talking about water. I think water is probably one of the best subjects to experiment with different shutter speeds to get very different results. Fast shutter speed to capture and freeze the motion of water flowing over a sand dollar, or slowed down to freeze the subject, but show the blur of the moving tide as the water sweeps back to the ocean. But if you try this, be sure to hold on to your tripod. I almost lost a camera, started to sweep out. And this is somewhere in between. At 1/10 of a second, the splashes hitting the rocks appear stretched out and are emphasized. Now, this great blue heron was flying in one direction above rapids below, flowing in a different direction. So a lot of action going on. And to freeze the motion, a very high shutter speed was needed. And of course, we have to talk about waterfalls. How do you get that smooth water flow? Some call it maybe a cotton candy look. Do you want to get that look? That's up to you. Here you see the detail in the water, sort of the crunchiness of it. Same scene with the shutter opened longer, with that smoother sort of cotton candy look to the waterfall. And keep in mind, neither approach is right or wrong, whichever you like best. And there are some wonderful images of waterfalls on your website. And I just want to give a shout out to Marshall Dupuy and Scott Rippey. Really, really nice. They clearly know what they're doing with their shutter speeds. Beautiful work. So waterfalls using different shutter speeds. Here is the same flowing water at different shutter speeds. I started out at 1,000th of a second, moved on to 1/15th of a second. I'm in the exact same place with my camera on a tripod and went as slow as 1/2 of a second, because I just want you to see how it really changes the look of your image. But I also want to get into how shutter speed affects exposure, because the more time the shutter is open, the more light comes into your camera. So for these examples, I have switched to manual mode. I'm no longer on shutter priority. Manual mode means I'm in control of all of the camera settings. So here I started out at 1/250th of a second and froze the moving water. So notice sort of the crunchiness down here in the foreground. And now at 1/15th of a second, a blur starts to occur, but still fairly sharp at the pool area in the center. It's a bit overexposed, but that can be adjusted by lowering the ISO. Now at a full second, notice swirls are starting to form in the pool, and the water in the foreground is definitely smoother. Now at 2 seconds, even more motion is captured, but this is a bit overexposed. My ISO is 200. Let's cut that ISO to 100 and see what happens. And look at sort of the motion down here in the foreground. So now I'm at the same shutter speed, the same 2 seconds, and the look of the water down here is the same, but because I lowered the ISO, the exposure now looks good. So what happens if we go to 4 seconds to really go for that smooth cotton candy look? Well, so much light is now coming in that the image again is overexposed. I'm already at the lowest ISO. So yes, you could change the f-stop, but for this example, I'll leave that constant. Instead, I'll add a neutral density filter to the front of the lens. It's kind of like putting on sunglasses, and that will cut down the light. Yes, by adding that filter, cut down some light, the exposure looks much better. I now have that smooth, dreamy look to the water. And here's one more at 6 seconds. And again, this may be too much smoothing out of the water for you. Some people like it, some people don't. That's up to you as an artist. And a few more waterfalls. To be sure the surrounding landscape is in focus during a long exposure, use your tripod. Get a sturdy tripod. And I can now check this one off my bucket list. Spectacular, but very popular waterfall in Oregon. One of the largest waterfalls in Iceland with a drop of almost 200 feet. And you can walk right up to the base of this and you get wet, but it's worth it. I just love this lone figure dwarfed by the power of nature. And maybe some of you have been to Thunder Hole in Acadia in Maine. The waves rush into this small cavern and the water is forced out with a thunderous roar, hence the name. Not really a safe spot for this man to be standing. Some years ago, 3 people were on these rocks when a rogue wave came up and washed them out to sea. It's a very powerful force of nature. And a very different image of water, flowing and serene. This was of the swells created off the back of a powerboat. The beautiful fountains at Longwood Gardens. And they don't allow tripods during the fountain show, so this is handheld. And I was somewhat far away, so as you can see, this has a very high ISO of 16,000, which creates some noise or graininess, but it doesn't bother me. And we don't always have perfect weather conditions. While photographing at a Pennsylvania State Park, Ohiopyle, Jim and I took cover in our car just before a huge storm blew through. And so we were trapped in the car. What do? I took shots through the windshield of the pouring rain at varying shutter speeds. I practiced. That's how I learn. And when the rain let up, I captured this very graceful flow of water. And this was taken on a bright sunny day. It looks like rain, but it's not. There was a sprinkler going and the sunlight highlighted the streaks of water. And I just turned a bit, and this was the effect of two sprinklers crossing paths. I want to mention another image on your website by Vella Kendall. She has this image of a dog jumping in snow with snow streaks flying in front of the dog. And you can tell she worked at shutter speed to get those snow streaks. Just a wonderful image. Now, this one may be a bit difficult to figure out. You get the sense of water flowing, but the image is a bit abstract. Is that some kind of a rabbit from Mars swimming through rapids? Well, it's actually simulated motion, as in reality, nothing is moving. It may start to make sense in its original vertical orientation. It's a macro image of an icicle. And still talking about water, Jim and I do all sorts of wacky photo experiments. We wanted to capture wine splashing up the side of a wine glass. So you may have seen this on some wine labels, you know, like the expensive wine that I buy that comes in the big cardboard box. So Jim built this ramp and put this wooden stop at the bottom. So when the glasses slid down, they would hit it, causing the liquid to flow up and out of the side of the glass. So, and this took a lot of practice, and we did it over and over. We're getting closer. Time to add some food coloring. Oops, we had a casualty, lost one. So, but we're getting closer to what we're trying to do, and got some random splashes. Finally got a pretty good one. And we just cropped in tighter for the final image and gave it a high key look. So still with water, a great way to capture motion using water is with reflections. Maybe nothing is moving, but it certainly looks like it is. This is another reflection. This gives the feel of one of those panning motion blurs, but it's really just the distortion from the slight movement of the water. Quite impressionistic, or quite abstract, the reflection of a windjammer in Maine. I want to describe a bit more about neutral density filters, as they can make quite a difference. Here's the ocean in Acadia hitting the rocks. You can see again that crunchy detail. This is at 1/125th of a second. But maybe you want to go for a different look, smooth out that water a bit. But going to a full 6 seconds on a bright sunny day, it would look something like this. Way too much light is coming into your camera, and you can't adjust any settings to get a good exposure when your shutter is letting in bright sunlight for a full 6 seconds. So you have to put those sunglasses on the front of your lens. You add a neutral density filter. Here's a 2-stop neutral density filter. Hopefully you can see that. And they come in. Here's one a little bit darker. Maybe you can see the difference. So they come in different stops, different amounts of shading of the light. And clouds. This is so much fun with clouds. They take on this mysterious feel when stretched out by using a neutral density filter and a long exposure. So on all of these, I'm using the same f-stop and ISO, only the time changes. Okay, so the first one, this is what the clouds just look like as you look at them. The second one is at 8 seconds. So now these clouds are showing the motion. And I have 8 stops of neutral density because I took that 2-stop and I stacked it with the 6-stop. Now I've got 8 stops. And another one, this one is at 30 seconds. So you really see, boy, what a different look that has. And this one is actually the exact same image, just converted to black and white, because I really like black and white with these stretched out clouds. Here's a beautiful sunset of the Philadelphia skyline. And I like these clouds, but they take on a whole different look when stretched out over 3 minutes. And again, I really like black and white with this look. So some stars and night photography. I haven't done a lot of night sky photography, but just wanted to point out the challenges with the motion of the stars, or of course, it's actually the motion of the Earth. You need to keep your shutter open long enough for enough light to reach your sensor. But if you leave it open too long, your stars start to turn into little streaks. So this was a 30-second exposure. I lit my daughter with a flashlight while the camera was on a tripod. Another Milky Way shot, but I thought this was kind of fun as I picked up a satellite moving through the night sky.
I see the airplane in that one though. That airplane streak.
Yes, you're right. Excellent. You never know what you're going to get. And I know you've all seen images of star trails. And I finally did my first attempt last winter. You've seen images much better than this one. This was my first and really only attempt so far. This was a really bitter cold, windy night. I'm out in a farmer's field in Lancaster County in Pennsylvania to find a dark sky area. I set up the camera, used an intervalometer to time the images, so at least I didn't have to freeze my fingers by pushing the shutter every 30 seconds over 40 minutes. So for those of you who don't know how this is done, it's multiple images are shot and then blended together as layers in Photoshop. Okay, we are finally done with water and stars, something different. How would you go about capturing the motion of tiny dandelion seeds flying off flower heads? Scanning. The camera is a flatbed scanner. This is just a scanner, an ordinary scanner we bought to scan documents. It's called a Canon CanaScan. I think it cost maybe 110 bucks. The image on the left shows how tomatoes and onions were placed on the scanner, and this is the resulting image on the right. And notice that everything is not only upside down, it's backwards. Over here, here's the big onion bottom left and top right. Here they are. Now it's on the bottom right and top left. This is what an arrangement looks like as it's placed on the scanner. It looks like quite a mess, doesn't it? Here is the scan from that mess. So what I want to point out, here's a big mayapple flower down here and a smaller mayapple flower. Here it is, the big one and the small one. I've covered it with this sprig of azalea. There's that sprig of azalea. So hopefully you get an idea of what's going on here. And here's how I use this to simulate motion. This plant is called jewelweed. And as a child, I loved trying to gently grab the seed pods and letting them pop open in your hand because it makes these springs that shoot the seeds out. So I just laid the pieces on the scanner to make it look like an exploding plant. Lettuce, tomatoes, and peppers gently falling to create this beautiful salad. And you can simulate the magic of milkweed seed pods floating away. I don't know how you could capture this out in the field. So let me take a pause here and ask if there are any questions. So Cam, maybe you can let me know. I don't know if there's anything in the chat. I don't see that. If anyone has any questions, I'd be curious to know if anyone has tried this.
This is Ray speaking. I have a question about, can you back up a couple images to that bowl image? Back up with the salad. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more behind that one? What exactly you did for that?
Okay, this one actually, it is a composite of two different images. The salad portions that you see here, these I laid on the scanner, on the flatbed scanner. So that's one of those scanner shots. This was actually shot just straight on. So this is a composite of a normal shot of salad in a salad bowl. And then on the top, I composited. So yeah,
Yes.
you caught me there.
Thank you. Now it makes sense.
Anything else? Cam, anything in the chat?
No, I don't see anything in the chat.
Okay. Usually people.
I
Go
had a
ahead.
quick
This is Ray again. Back to the scanning technique. So you're using, you're actually putting them on the actual glass of the scanning bed, or do you have a protection layer, like another piece of glass or something else? Do you have something to protect the scanner bed?
Go back to this one. No, I don't. I do try to be careful because I think if you got too much moisture and it seeped down into the sides of the scanner, it probably would fry the scanner. So what I'll do on a shot like this, where the tomatoes may be juicy, I'll blot them first. And I also blot them because you don't want a whole lot of water here either. So, but I do lay my objects right on the scanner.
Wow. And then
Okay.
do you run it with the lights off, or do you put like a black box over top?
I do not, and I don't turn the lights out either.
Wow.
What happens is the light from the scanner, this light here, it is so close to your subject that it falls off very quickly. So when you think of a scanner, the light, it travels in this band, you know, kind of through here. And that light is just a fraction of an inch away from the object laying on the glass. So it's the light, and it's so close to its subject that the light falls off quickly. So I do this in a room with lights on. I do avoid a bright light. You don't want a light hanging, you know, shining right down onto the scanner, but I'll do this in daylight with lights on in a room.
Ooh.
And the fall off, it just turns black very quickly.
Wow.
And the lid is open.
Uh-huh. I know Ed
Otherwise,
had a question. Ed?
Sure.
Well, no, actually, a comment. We had to do a lot of this stuff in the past with film where we didn't have back screen, and we learned to improvise. And if any people out there who are interested in taking beautiful photos, can't afford a tripod, whatever your lens, the focal length of your lens is, that is the slowest speed you can work with to take a picture with very little motion blur. And the reverse of that is you can actually go and use that. And if you want to get a lot of motion blur, but still keep it somewhat steady, you can go, like I did a lot of stuff at racetracks with indoor motorcycle racing, where I took a 14 millimeter lens and pan focused and with a strobe, and was able to get some incredible shots, much like you got with the bicyclist. But we need to have sharp images of the bicyclist, so that's why I had the strobe on there. But there's lots of images you can play with. My rule of thumb is go out and play, and don't worry. Don't think of the camera as an expensive piece of equipment. It's a toy. Play with it.
Good advice.
Excellent advice.
Hey, Kim, that's Carol. The question regarding the neutral density filters. Do you use the straight neutral density, or do you use variable density?
I use the straight ones. Yes, you can also purchase variable ones that I'm not even sure how it works. I guess you twist it or something, but I use these straight ones. Here's a 2 stops. And again, here's a 6 stop. And again, you can stack them. That's what I have. And you can get really, really expensive ones. I have ones from B&W filter. They're less expensive than, I think it's Stingray that's really expensive. But they're cool to,
They have the I forget what it's called. You can have a filter holder. It's like and you slide the glass in the holder for different filters and neutral density stuff.
Yeah. I don't have one of those either, but I've seen those. Yeah. Okay, anything
Those
else?
are Coke and filters.
I'm sorry, Ed, what was it?
Those are usually Coke and filters. At least they used to be. They had the filter holder.
Okay.
Kogan.
Great.
Okay.
I don't know if they're still around or not.
Okay, let me get back. I think we were here. Okay, I'll continue. Let's move on to rear curtain sync. So when shooting with a flash and using a slow shutter speed, you can record movement and freeze it at the same time. So here I held up 4 golf balls. Jim opened the shutter. I dropped the golf balls. They bounced down, back up. They suspended for a moment, which is why you see them somewhat in focus here. And then as they're coming back down, flash. Flash went off to freeze them. Here I did a selfie with a 10-second delay on the timer. So think of this for your new challenge coming up of your selfie. So I could run and get in front of the camera myself. So there is a setting in most cameras called rear curtain sync. So basically,
And to interrupt, actually, that actually almost looks like you're using sign language in that picture. Almost could look like sign language.
what am I saying? I hope I'm not swearing.
Yeah, so we could play around with it. Us, you know, Tori and Ray and I, we could play around with that in sign language.
Oh, that's funny. So in most cameras, or in all cameras, when you take a shot, the first curtain opens, letting the light into your camera. And then at the end of the exposure, the second curtain closes, and then they reset and then get ready for the next shot. So with rear curtain sync, it opens and now I'm moving around and a flash goes off right before that second curtain closes or at the end of your exposure. So you can see the motion as I move around and then the flash goes off at the end. So something is frozen and in focus. And then I experimented with some light sticks and probably some wine. You can see Jim in the room behind me trying to ignore me. So I'm just playing around, having fun, experimenting. So Jim and I played around with this during the COVID shutdown. This is a 2-second exposure as I move through the frame. And again, the flash goes off at the end. And I like this one. I think it looks like my hair flew off. And we have this mottled gray background set up, which is why you see a sort of smoky textured look here. And I like this textured look, but this is not quite what I was trying to achieve. So I asked for a black background for my birthday and I got it. This is the look that I wanted to create with the black background. So Jim, again, is my lighting expert. Over on the right side, he has set up a continuous light and a softbox that diffuses and spreads the light. And that provides the light here as I jump around through the frame. And then on the left is a speed light that fires at the end of the exposure to freeze the action. Here's another from the same photo shoot. Jim says I look like an angel. Okay, LAPP, or Light Art Performance Photography, is not only a mouthful, it's a style in which you literally paint your pictures with light. And this is fun. And the crazy part is, it is created with only one picture. No Photoshop skills needed. You just grab a light and experiment. And if I was in a real room with all of you, I would ask you how to guess how I did this. I'm sure probably some of you can probably guess. We attached a string of LED lights to a canoe paddle. And this is the motion of the paddle as Jim paddles in the dark, and I take a 30-second shot. This is another done the same way. And some of you have probably done this, fire spinning. It's done by swinging steel wool that's been set on fire. Our camera club hosted a workshop and we did this in a safe location at a firefighter training location, and there were emergency professionals nearby. And with a slow shutter speed of 10 seconds, you capture this rain of sparks flying down. It stretches out those sparks. So of course we had to do something similar at home. Now Jim has me holding a grinder on a piece of sheet metal to create these flying sparks. And we're safe, by the way. I have on safety goggles and an apron and gloves. But this is actually another example of rear curtain sync, as it's a long exposure of a half a second to show the spray of those flying sparks, and then a flash to light me at the end of the exposure. And the next thing I know, Jim asked me to wear my dark exercise clothes, and then he's wrapping colorful string lights around me. Now, what is he trying to do? This. He had me run through the frame when it was dark enough. So again, this is a combination of light painting, or that LAPP, and rear curtain sync, as the flash was burst at the end to freeze the image of me. Now, you don't have to have the flash at the end. Frankly, I think this image would have held up just with these really cool streaks. They're kind of fun, but I like having the context of me running through, and it gives you the idea of where these streaks came from. Those are those lights wrapped around me. So this one usually stumps people. How is this done? Well, we have a friend, Charles, who loves playing with all sorts of toys to create light motion. And he did a workshop for our club. So you can see here, this is a bicycle tire with lights placed around the rim. And here you can see it in the dark and get the idea of how it spins on the floor. 4 seconds for it to go around in one rotation. And this is Charles just walking through the frame, holding that bicycle wheel, kind of spinning it around a little bit. Here's Charles holding a lightsaber, and this image gives you an idea of what is going on. This is what the image looks like in the dark. He's in there, you just can't see him. And here's my husband, Jim, again. He's a pretty good sport. So for this one, our friend Charles is walking around Jim, waving a red flashlight wand. So my camera was on bulb mode, meaning that the shutter was opened with a remote cable and left open until Charles was finished painting with light. And when he said stop, the remote button was pushed again to end the exposure. So that's why you see that strange 53 seconds. And physiograms, this is something new I learned while doing research for this presentation. Physiograms create some really nice abstract light painting images that I think they're similar to that toy when you were little, a spirograph. They're quite easy and cheap to create. So, hey, give it a try. And here's how you do it. 30 seconds or longer, you got to preset your focus. So I've got a little pen light, a little flashlight that's dangling from a string, okay? And in my case, it's dangling from a ceiling fan. The ceiling fan is off. That's not what gives it the motion. I've just gently pushed the end of that flashlight, and I tried to push it so it does a little pendulum motion. And you have to do it a few times to get it right. But you can create some fun sort of otherworldly graphic images. Let's set that flash off multiple times in the same exposure. Now we paint with bursts of light. This is just a single frame of 2 dancers. A tripod is a must. You set it up in pre-focus and then turn out the lights and leave the shutter open for 8 seconds. A burst of flash from a speed light was manually triggered 4 times to freeze the dancers in motion. So while my shutter is open in the dark, these dancers are moving, flash, 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 flash. This one's also 8 seconds, and the flash was shot 5 times. This was done, of course, at that workshop by our friend Charles. But Jim and Betsy, we have to try this at home. So Jim has a Canon speed light that he can set in multi-mode. And in this case, he set it to preset to fire 5 bursts per second for 3 seconds. And that's how you get those 15 bursts. So it's very fast, flash, flash, flash. And here's sort of a rather surreal image. Okay, I'd love to know what I'm saying here. I think that one, I must be swearing in sign language. But this is what it started out like. And we made many attempts at this, and most were just a confusing jumble. It's kind of hard to tell what the heck you're looking at. Maybe it's because I don't really know how to jump through here properly. I don't know. But on this one, I really like this jumble of hands. So it's Jim image, but I just cropped in on just those hands. I like that. This one worked a bit better. We lowered the number of flash bursts from 15 down to 9. So now it's a bit less jumbled. And I think I'm about to punch myself in the face here. Pixel stick. Okay, Jim was awarded this toy at one of our camera club celebrations. So there are actually 200 tiny LED lights that go along the edge of this pixel stick. It comes with a dozen built-in patterns, different colors, rainbow patterns. And if you wave the stick around a bit while walking, it creates these really cool patterns. This is that pre-programmed rainbow pattern that comes with the pixel stick. And you can just create some fun stuff like this. Here, Jim asked me to hold the pixel stick close to the ground and walk through our woods. Let's add a person to the shot. We asked our friend to pose as still as possible while we walked behind her with the pixel stick, so she appears in silhouette. So remember that rear curtain flash? Well, now we've used that technique with the pixel stick. So you can actually see me over here as I'm finishing up walking. I'm waving that pixel stick around behind Jim. And at the end of the exposure, we've added a flash. So Jim has been lit up, and again, that flash is very fast. So he's frozen. This took a while for me to walk across, but he was frozen by the flash. Another example, this time I am the subject. But here's where it really gets crazy. You can load your own image onto the Pixel Stick. Each one of its 200 LEDs acts like a pixel on a screen, displaying your image one vertical line at a time as you walk. So here we have our friend Bob set up like he is raising a glass to himself. We already had this picture of Bob. This was on our computer. We downloaded this picture onto the Pixel Stick. Then we just asked Bob to sit in the dark, hold up his beer bottle, and sit still. He had no idea what we were doing. That other image of Bob is in the stick. It's in here. And as Jim walks by, slices of the photo flash, so one slice at a time, it almost looks like this. All you see is this weird blinking thing walking by. And then when Jim was done walking with the stick, we lit Bob with a burst of flash. And alas, the end result is real Bob and virtual Bob together. This is a single frame. It is not photoshopped. For this one, I'm sitting in a canoe, and the canoe is sitting on a picnic table. Jim builds and restores wooden canoes, and this is one he built. So an image of the ocean was loaded onto the Pixel Stick, and then Jim walked by twice, once with the ocean image on the stick behind me, and then again in front of me. And Jim loaded a creepy picture of himself and walked it behind me. He told me to look scared. Again, I had no idea what image was on the stick. I couldn't see it at the time. And yeah, that's a creepy image, Jim. So what if you are the motion? You've seen examples like this where the photographer and the camera are stationary and the subject has movement. So here you see these, ghost-like images of the people as they move on the escalator. Well, what happens if the photographer is moving on the escalator? Both the photographer and camera are moving through something that is stationary. So the escalator steps are sharp as the camera and the steps are moving together, but the sides of the escalator show the motion as the camera moves up and the sides do not. So I had to try this one about 20 times as I was paddling solo, and I had to paddle really hard to get the canoe moving, and then lay back low and grab the camera, put the paddle down, grab the camera. I had to lay down low because I needed the front of the canoe in the shot. And this is that same canoe that Jim built, but hopefully you get the idea. The canoe is sharp as the camera is moving with the canoe, while the grasses in the water appear to glide by. And another really cool image on your website using this same concept by Mark Balmser, in a car passing autumn trees on a curved road, and you can see the motion of the trees in the road, but the front of the car is sharp. It's a really cool shot. Subject doesn't move, you do, but let's take it up to yet another level. What if you're in a car going 25 miles per hour while you pan a subject? As the car goes by, you rotate the camera to keep the subject in the frame. You do need two people to do this, a driver and the photographer. And you get this swirly, crazy rotation effect. I'm gonna see if I can demonstrate here. Hopefully you can all see this. Pretend the back of this chair is the tree. Behind the tree is a road, okay? So I'm in a car, and I'll actually hold my camera. I'm in a car, and I point my camera at that tree before we get there. And as the car goes by, I keep the camera pointed at the tree. Okay, so you can see the camera is actually rotating to stay pointed at the tree. So hopefully you get the idea of what's going on. But so it's a combination of the lateral movement of the car and the rotational movement of the camera. A lot of movement going on. And this works great with colorful trees such as dogwoods or redbuds in the spring, or the colorful trees in autumn. That's my favorite time to try this. But you can also focus on other subjects. Here's a cabin in Valley Forge. And I like how you can actually see the rotation on the grass down here. Kind of looks like ghosts are leaving the cemetery. And sometimes it results in a hurricane of texture and color. And I love this type of photography. It makes me feel the excitement of connecting with the forest as I move through it. And it can be quite abstract. Impressions of color and texture in which details are dissolved by the motion. But in most images, there's enough form retained to suggest a sense of subject. And here are the how-to notes on this one. You do it from a moving car. You do need 2 people. You're the photographer, have someone else drive. And you drive past your subject while rotating the camera to keep it pointed at the subject. About 25 miles per hour, I think works best, but I have done this from the highway going much faster. It's just much more difficult. And about 1/15 of a second, but you can change that. This does take a lot of practice. If you want to try this, please don't get frustrated. Keep at it. You get a lot of throwaways. Even though I've been doing this a long time, I still may take 100 shots before I get one that I like. Good thing it's not film. So up until now, with the exception of the Star Trails image and the salad going into the bowl, all the others can be done in camera. No Photoshop necessary. Let's look at ways to create or simulate motion using post-processing tools. So this looks like a zoom blur, but it was actually a fully focused sunflower. The radial blur was added in Photoshop. Now, I'm not going to get into the how-to specifics of Photoshop, as that would be a whole other presentation. I just want to share a few ideas of how you can use post-processing to simulate motion. I wanted to capture fireflies and create a sort of magical fairyland look. So I took about 20 shots, each one 6 seconds, to capture the movement of the lightning bugs. And then it's actually quite easy to blend them together as layers in Photoshop. Here I started with a normal shot of birch trees. And in this case, I added the blur in Photoshop, but this is different than the panning blurs we did before, because I wanted to add some of the bark texture from the first one back in. Okay, now you see a little bit of texture there. I'm going to go back and forth, okay? Without the texture, with a little bit of the texture. Because here in the finished image, you see just a hint of the texture of the bark on the beautifully blurred trees. And this is done by bringing both images into Photoshop as layers and just brushing a bit of the texture from one image onto the other. Back to setting up the scene and waiting for something to happen. But this time I'm going to give it a little Photoshop help. In Chelsea Market in New York City, there's this stretch of flooring that's lit from below. And I loved watching the variety of legs and shoes and just felt there had to be a shot. So I sat on a bench and I took lots and lots of shots. And back home on the computer, I liked this one and this one with the colorful shoes. And I wondered what would happen if I combine the two. This is my finished image. And this represents the hustle and bustle and the diversity that I was experiencing at the time. And, you know, I didn't even realize until a month later that this pair of shoes back here moving into the frame, it's actually the same feet walking out of the frame, but that's okay. I like it. Remember this one done in camera using the long exposure and rear curtain sync? This motion blur was all done in post-processing by adding a blur photo in Photoshop. Here, I love the solitude of this lonely figure walking on a shallow beach. This is in Cape Cod. Here's the original image, not a great photo, dust spots and all, but I liked the mood. So I decided to try to give it a little help in Photoshop. So I just used a motion blur filter to smooth out the waves and then enhanced the color to create this serene scene. This is how I remember the magic of those endless patterns of the shallow waves. And a fun trick you can use on seascapes. In this one, I used a fast shutter speed to capture the crashing surf. Notice the crashing surf over here. And in this one, I used that neutral density filter to show the soft, more romantic look of the ocean. But then I wanted to add back the excitement of the waves. So I can combine the two images and just brush in the waves and spray from the other image. A couple of images captured of skateboarders at FDR Park in Philadelphia. I liked the shadow on this one. And this one caught in midair. A second later, he was on the ground. And these were done, of course, with a fast shutter speed. But I wondered if I could simulate the motion by using multiple images, similar to what Thomas Eakins did. So I stood in one place and put my camera on burst mode and just kept shooting. 13 images blended together in Photoshop. And I did the same with the snow geese at Middle Creek. So this is about 30 separate exposures of images taken in burst mode and then combined in Photoshop. So as opposed to just freezing birds in flight, I think it gives the impression of movement. You can actually see the pattern of flight as they move across the sky. And this one has a bit of a painterly look to it. And you can actually see the movement of the winter vegetation as it sways in the breeze. This effect was created by blending multiple images together. And I want to share my thought process on a shot. Jim is in charge of workshops for our camera club, and he loves ballet. So he set up a photo workshop with the local ballet company, the Brandywine Ballet. And they provided the dancers in their studio, and we had camera club members bring studio lights. And it was a lot of fun. The dancers were amazing, and I think everyone came away with shots they were happy with, and I got quite a few as well. But in addition to shots like this one, I wanted to try something unique. I wanted a shot that no one else in the group that day would have. There were 25 of us in the same room with the same dancer in the same costume with the same light. I wanted something different. I wanted this. So remember the story of Ansel Adams and visualization, the combination of imagination and technique. I wanted to show a progression of movements. I visualized this in advance, and I had to plan the shots I needed to take to create it. So how did I do this? Well, most of the images were shot with a very fast shutter speed. That's why we brought all the high-powered lights. So you can see here, this image was shot to freeze the amazing Amanda at the height of a leap. Note the high ISO and 1/1000th of a second. Now look what happens when we go with a much longer shutter speed of 1/3 of a second. Now there's a blur that indicates movement. It's a pretty bad shot. I don't want a two-faced Amanda, but I wanted to show that you need to take a lot to get a few that you like. So here are the shots that I use straight out of camera. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this last one, I wanted her to face the opposite direction. So I turned her around and then put them all together in Photoshop, finished image. And a different technique to show motion. I took multiple images in succession and then brought them in as layers in Photoshop. And by lowering the opacity of some of the images, there is just a subtle sense of graceful movement. And this was done the same way. And sometimes I just like to experiment. I wondered what would happen if I put Amanda, the ballet dancer, inside one of my swirly hurricanes. I think she's on her way to Oz. And we drove by these giant wind turbines, and I thought I would try the same technique. So here we go, 20 images combined in Photoshop. Kind of fun. So the last series I will share show some examples of images that began in my imagination, and then I had to figure out how to create it. Now, this one was a bit more difficult as the model was not as cooperative as it appears in this finished image. My dog Shadow did not want to sit still. So this presented a different kind of motion challenge, how to make it stop. Took a couple of assistants, Jim and our daughter Alex, a lot of flour, a lot of tries. And Jim finally figured out if you put a little bit of peanut butter right there on that spoon, she would keep it in her mouth. So this is the shot I used of our dog Shadow. I then had Jim toss some flour around. I'm going to use this in the final image. Removed Jim's hand, added the flying flour for the motion. And here you go, Shadow the chef. Now, this is not the final shot, nor the final model. So I want to set up a dramatic shot and recreate Lizzie Borden. You've heard of her? Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. Well, I started by setting up the lighting and the camera angle. Jim's my lighting expert again. He set up side lighting to create that scary look. So I actually have the camera lying on the floor, and you can see I'm triggering the remote control in my hand. Now I bring in the real model, our daughter Alex, and I try to get her to look menacing. She kept cracking up and took quite a few shots. So here I am holding a fan to get her hair to fly up. So first I tried a hair dryer, but it wasn't powerful enough. So I held up an electric fan, and that really put some motion in her hair. We're making adjustments to the lighting. We had some problems as the axe was casting a shadow across the side of her face. So Jim's repositioning the lights. Alex is moving the axe in different places. And we're getting closer. And I did some editing. Here's my final image, Lizzie Borden. Makes me shudder. And another version from the same shoot. This one I put in sepia to kind of give it an old time look. But I think it's still quite terrifying. And this is our other daughter, Kelsey. She looks a bit nicer, don't you think? Well, while stuck at home, we've watched a lot of photography videos and practiced lighting. And again, Jim is much better at it than I am. He set up this softbox light above Kelsey that gives that really soft, beautiful light. And for Kelsey, I didn't use a fan. I brought in the leaf blower. And then Jim put a couple of colored gels on the lights. And we're just having fun. But then I asked Kelsey to pose with a lantern, like she was afraid and running away. She plays a virtual game with friends called Pathfinders that includes dragons. So I envisioned a composite of her running through the forest, chased by a dragon. Then I photographed her Pathfinder dragon, went into my archives, found an image of the redwood forest in Oregon, added a blue tone in Photoshop, and blended them together. Now I just need to add the dragon. And you know what? I don't like it. I hate it. To me, it just looks stupid. So not everything goes according to plan. So I scrapped the dragon. But I kind of like the image. So I thought, well, maybe I'll change the crop slightly. I'm going to add some light in that lantern and change the glow on her face to match the lantern light. And here's the finished image, Into the Woods. And you can use your imagination as to what she is running from. Okay, 2 more examples and we'll wrap this up. Our camera club has a fun summer challenge, and a few years ago, the theme was song titles. And we were assigned 10 different song titles to illustrate with our photography. So you may know the song, I Set Fire to the Rain by Adele. Well, I immediately visualized the image I wanted to create. This is it, my finished image. I wanted it to rain water and fire on me. So I started with a shot of me in one of our canoes. Jim also built this one. I cropped in. I'm going to use this in the final shot. And then I used the fire from that fire spinning workshop. I'm going to use some of these sparks in the final image. And then I needed rain. I asked Jim to hold up the hose at the garden. And I just practiced with different shutter speeds, fast, a bit slower. I added some clarity. Now I had my rain. Next, I composited the rain, the sparks, and the image of me. And you can see up here in the corner how I tilted the images to make them kind of hit the umbrella in the direction that I wanted. And I still need just to add some sparks to the top of that umbrella. Finished image, I set fire to the rain. Now, these summer challenges, they're a lot of fun, and they force us to think outside the box and get creative. So I'm glad you're all going to be doing something similar. Now, I have done some wacky and embarrassing stuff. You may know the song, It's All About That Bass by Meghan Trainor. Well, if you do, you know it's actually all about one's derriere. So an image popped into my mind. There was a rather famous image making its rounds on the internet of Kim Kardashian with her rather shapely butt. So yeah, I have no shame. I'm going to try to replicate this shot of Kim Kardashian. So I did this when Jim went out, as I was too embarrassed to even let him know what I was doing. You can see that I'm holding the remote. I'm trying different poses, and I bring in the props. And this is the one I went with. Remember those wine glasses with the splashing wine? Here they are again. Finished image. Yeah, it's pretty clear. I ain't no size 2, but I can shake it like I'm supposed to do, because you know, I'm all about that base. So yeah, we've all gone a bit stir crazy while stuck at home, but there are so many photo techniques you can learn and try out at home. You don't need to travel. Just experiment, try something new, and have fun. And I've had fun giving this presentation to you. And I would like to say thank you. So I will open this up, and hopefully there are some more questions or some comments. Again, I will share a PDF of many of the slides. Hopefully that'll be helpful to you. And I'm just going to show this just for a moment. This is my email address and my website, and I will have this again on the PDF. So if you don't get a chance to write this down, but if you have questions after this, or if people are watching this video afterwards, if you want to email me questions, please feel free to do so. So let me stop sharing my screen and open it up and see if there are now any questions or any comments. If I've challenged anyone to try something new, I hope so.
Gosh, Betsy, now members should know where I got the idea of creating a selfie. And it would be even better if you were doing something unexpected. You gave some wonderful examples of that. Any questions from anyone while slides are fresh in your mind?
I'm curious to know if anyone's tried that rotation blur from the car. Does anyone?
No, but I'm going to
that?
tomorrow on. I just told Marshall is here, my friend is here, and we're going on our trip tomorrow. And I said, we're going to do that tomorrow in the car.
Yeah.
So that should be fun.
Yeah, and Bombay Hook might be a good place to do that, although you may be driving too slowly through, through parts of Bombay Hook. You can, the roads getting there are probably good.
Yeah.
And please don't get frustrated, because you won't get it at first, okay? No, it's going to take a while.
Yeah.
So.
I really appreciate how you took a look at our website and at our exhibition photos and referenced some of our members. That was a wonderful touch that you did. I really appreciate that.
I'm happy to do that. And again, I always get inspired looking at other people's images, and your club has a lot of talent.
Well, you've certainly inspired us. I mean, just some of the wonderful creative ways. What are some of the other presentations that you give? I'm sure members would love to see more of that scanner art, for example.
The other one that I do most often, I think you would like this one, Cam, is on still lifes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in the still life, I also do the scanner photography. I've done, I showed the one image in there of the floral arrangement. I've done quite a lot of scanning. I call them still lifes. They really are. So they're like floral arrangements or pieces of flowers or things like that. But I go through still life, all sorts of things that you would never really think of in a still life. But, you can tell I like to experiment.
For sure. Any other comments or questions for Betsy?
No questions, but I've really, really enjoyed your presentation, and I do feel very inspired. So thank you so much.
Oh, good. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. Well, again, if anyone has any other questions later on, if you want to send me an email, that would be great.
How are we going to receive the PDF?
I will send it to you tomorrow, Cam.
Good.
And then you can just email it out, or however you communicate.
Yes, in our next email blast, along with the link to this recording. Perfect.
Okay, good.
Okay, wonderful.
Great.
Okay, so I think we got some great ideas also for future challenges. I want somebody to step up and run some wonderful workshops like you guys seem to have at your clubs. I think we need that. that kind of enthusiasm and infusion of new ideas. So if
Yeah.
anyone is willing to lead a workshop like that, like anything, just to get us together and give us some new and fun ideas.
Well, and if you want any ideas of workshop topics, I could put anyone in touch with my husband, Jim, because he's the one who runs the workshops for our club. So he's
Wonderful.
got a lot of great ideas.
Does he travel to do workshops?
No, not really. We don't. The only one we've done is one on macro and close up and at home creativity, actually, but it involves hauling a whole ton of stuff
Oh, yeah.
to a place with tables. So it's a lot of work.
Right. I used to teach macro photography at the community college and I gave it
Okay.
up because it was just so much stuff to take.
Yeah.
All
That's a lot.
right.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. I enjoyed this.
Thank you. Yes. All right. I guess we're done for this evening. I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you.
Stop recording.